Agus, oh no, I got it wrong. Dígwit agus fáilte go dtí on Clonestar Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Clonestar Podcast. I am your host, Sho Hurley, and this week I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back prolific Star Trek author David Mack, whose new book, Ring of Fire, is available now wherever you get your books. David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Now, guys, this episode does contain spoilers, so if you have not read the book, please be sure to read the book immediately and come back here and listen to me and David discussing everything that is going to ruin the book and things like that. The link is somewhere here that Mike is going to put on the screen where me and David are not pointing, so there you go. David, I was reading online today. You said, is this your 827 Star Trek book, or what number Star Trek book is it at this point?
This book is my 32nd original novel for Star Trek. It is my 39th novel in my career overall.
Mm-hmm.
So at 32 original Star Trek novels, I am now tied for second place in the category of most original Star Trek novels in the history of the franchise. I am tied for second place with Michael Jan Friedman.
Mm-hmm.
Ahead of us is only the late, great Peter David, who wrote 40 original Star Trek novels. And I want to clarify, original Star Trek novel means an original story, not adapted from something else, not based on something else, and it's narrative fiction, not a work like a Vulcan travel guide, which is really a story, but rather sort of an exercise in world building. I'm talking about narrative, original, long-form prose fiction, original novels. So in that category, using that specific definition, and allowing for co-written works to count as one work toward each author rather than dividing it by some weird percentage. By that measure, Mike has 32 and I have 32 for the moment.
So what you're saying is, if we turn the camera around on your wall, there'd be a kind of a picture of you and Mike tied, and then there'd be another picture of Peter just further down the line, and you're there going, "I'm going to get."
Well, no, I don't think I have photos of them. Well, I do have a photo of Mike Friedman up on the wall over here behind the computer, but that's from his roast back in 2010, which I produced at the Shore Leave Convention.
Does it ever get old? Like the whole thing of like writing a book, releasing a book, seeing it like kind of getting released as it is at the moment, never gets old. Always the kind of the charm and the wonder to it.
There's always a pleasure in that moment when you get the box of books, usually without any sort of advance warning or fanfare from the publisher. It just shows up one day, somewhere maybe a month or so before the book is actually released. Mm-hmm. You go, what is this? Oh, it's my book. And you open the box with this, it's like you're opening a present on Christmas, and you pull out the paper, and there it is, your lovely new book. Your lovely new literary creation that you have toiled over and protected for months. And you realize in just a short span of time, it's going to be going out into the cruel world, flying alone where it must fend for itself. And you must go, fly, little birdie, fly. But it doesn't get old. It's still always a pleasure to see my name on the cover of a new book.
I'm reminded of the end of Back to the Future when his father opens the book for the first time, like a box.
The new book is here.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I have to ask you, David. So, at the end of the book, you have a lovely dedication to your editor, the late Margaret Clark, and also the late Peter David. What was Margaret like to work with, and what was her contribution to Star Trek?
Margaret was a wonderful person to work with. Once you got to know her, she was described by some of her friends as an odd duck. She could be a peculiar person in her way, but she was so knowledgeable about Star Trek, about what made a story quintessentially Star Trek, what it was that made a story worthy of being told in the Star Trek universe. She understood the world. She understood the point of view, the characters, the setting, the technology, the continuity, all of it. She had started out as an editor of comic books back in, I think, the early to mid 90s. I believe she was working for DC Comics. She was working on their Trek line. And I think around 95, she got an opportunity to move over to a position as an assistant or associate editor with the Star Trek books department at Pocket, which was part of Simon & Schuster. And so she started there around 1995. And worked her way up, eventually becoming a senior editor before she was laid off from a full-time position, but she was kept on as a full-time freelancer working, from home, basically without benefits. But she remained the acquiring editor of Star Trek novels for a period of about 20 years, from around the year 2005 or so, maybe a little later, to around the time when she passed away in 20. I think it was late last year, like my not really last year, like March. Um, so she was basically a fun person in the regard, like, if she called you on the phone because she worked from home, she would just go on and on and on because she had nobody else to talk to. So a phone call with her that should take 5 minutes will actually take 90 because she'll want to talk about this and that and share some gossip and trade a couple of rumors and bitch and kvetch about something else. But what I always loved and what I'm going to miss more than anything was that, whether I called her or she called me, upon picking up the phone, she would always greet me with my full name in this particular cadence of hers. David Mack is the way she said it. Always my full name, always said with that sort of intonation. And there was just something charming about it. And over the years, we started out working together on a number of things. She was actually the first editor who ever bought a book from me with the Starfleet Survival Guide. Although the Survival Guide was edited and trafficked through production by a woman named Jessica McGivney, it was Margaret who had put me up for the job, and it was Margaret who actually executed the contract with me and with my agent. So Margaret was the first one to buy a book from me. She was my editor on 3/4 of the books I've written for Star Trek over the last 20 some odd years. And over time, traveling back together, let's say driving back on road trips from conventions over the years, the fact that we both lived out in Queens, Margaret and I got to be friends. She wasn't just my editor, she was my friend. And then, it became clear that something was wrong. She fell out of touch around the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And so it became clear something was wrong. Actually, it actually would have been this year, end of 24, beginning of 25. I guess time has bled together. I've lost track of. I can't even keep track of when things are happening anymore. But yeah, essentially, we knew something was wrong. We made some calls to the editors to say, hey, someone should really check in on her. And by the time we found out she was hospitalized, she was farther along with an illness that had come on very suddenly than any of us had expected. A number of us were making plans to try and come visit her. I know David R. George, who was very friendly with her, was trying to find time to come up from his home in Atlanta to try and visit. I was trying to figure out how to negotiate public transit out to the wilds of eastern Long Island to go see her. But before any of us could figure out those logistics and get out there to pay a visit, she was gone. It happened so quickly. From the time we found out something was wrong to the time she was gone was a matter of weeks. And then, suddenly she had commissioned from me this Star Trek Strange New Worlds novel. This was the last book she commissioned from me. Yeah. And we developed the story together along with Kirsten Beyer. But Margaret never got to read the manuscript. I turned the manuscript in on time back in January, February of this year. And I was expecting her to read it. I didn't know that by the time I turned the book in, I didn't know she was already hospitalized at that point. And so she passed away without ever having read this story. And it feels sort of weird. She and I built the story together, but she didn't get to see how it turned out. And it's sort of sad to feel like, this friend of mine who I've known for 30 years is just suddenly gone. This was like, in a lot of ways, one of my chief creative partners in Star Trek. So yeah, it was a real blow to the system, a real shock.
And the late, great Peter David as well, how important are his contributions to Star? Like, I think all of us at some point have read something to do with Peter David. Like all his books are completely, they're legendary in terms of what he wrote and things like that. For you, David, how important was he?
Well, Peter David was an enormously influential figure in various media, both in comic books, prose novels, television, just pop culture in general. He was a force of nature. In particular, in Star Trek books, though, all of us who have written for Star Trek in the books or the comics over the last, let's say, 25 years, 30 years, we owe him a huge creative debt. He was the one who created a series called Star Trek New Frontier. And this debuted back in the late 90s, 98, I think. And at that time, I was just, I had some TV writing credits under my belt. I was working as a research and, other assistant around the Star Trek books office in my spare time. And he was, at that point, he was already Peter David. I mean, this was, even in the late 90s, he was already a huge name. And because of this, they were willing to take a chance on letting him create a new Star Trek literary original property with Pocket Books, one that would be licensed and approved by Star Trek, even though it had never been on TV. And a lot of people at that time, the licensor was convinced that this was never going to fly. They're like, we just don't see why fans would buy these books when there's no TV or movie property behind it to support it. What would be the draw? Why would they do this? And what Peter and editor John Ordover at that time were banking on was that there was an appetite among fans for the Star Trek universe, not just the existing TV and film properties as they were at that time, but that they wanted more of the universe overall. They wanted a bigger Star Trek universe. And Star Trek New Frontier was a massive success. It was huge. It took off like a rocket, and it proved, and partly because of the popularity of Peter David, a big part, obviously, but he proved that there was a market for literary original Trek that didn't have to come from a TV series or a movie. And because of that, they were able to create a monthly ebook series, which was originally called Star Trek SCE, which stood for Starfleet Corps of Engineers. The series was later just renamed Star Trek Corps of Engineers. And this monthly ebook series of novellas became sort of a minor league farm team for up-and-coming Star Trek literary talent. Writers like myself, Dayton Ward, Kevin Dillmore, Bill Leisner, a lot of other guys came up, with stories in the SCE franchise, contributing parts to this, and it was edited by Keith R.A. DeCandido, who's another well-known, very influential Star Trek author. Because of the success of New Frontier, Keith got to create his IKS Gorkin Klingon books that are set aboard a Klingon ship with an all-Klingon crew. That's something that could not have been done before Peter David changed the landscape, changed the rules. And at the same time, the Titan series was created after the Nemesis movie established that Riker was going to go on. He was going to command the Nemesis. Troy was going with him. New ship, new command, new life. And someone said, well, that's a great opportunity. Why don't we see what his life is like and create the Titan series? And that's Star Trek Titan suddenly exists. And they started saying, well, if we can do this and create all these new original literary properties beyond what already exists, now that the continuity seems to have temporarily come to a halt after Nemesis and after Enterprise, why can't we just continue that existing continuity ourselves and start telling our own stories in the era after that? And we got clearance to do that. And then I got, for instance, permission with Marco Palmieri to co-create Star Trek Vanguard, which later spun off another miniseries, Star Trek Seekers, and so on and so forth. And we created, we had Section 31 novels, and we had all this sort of, we had a whole set of novels set in the Mirror Universe where we kind of did our own literary take on it that was less campy, less ridiculous than the TV version. We took a more serious approach and sort of modeled it on Asimov's Foundation, to a certain extent. All of this stuff, all of these great literary experiments that we played with over the last 25 years in the Trek novels could not have happened if Peter David back in 1998 had not created New Frontier. If New Frontier had sunk like a rock, or if he hadn't created it at all, none of the rest of this would have ever happened in all likelihood. But Peter David, because he was bold, because he was an innovator, because he was willing to challenge the status quo, and because he was popular enough to do it and make it work, and talented enough to make it work, he proved it could be done. And because he did it once, fans were willing to give it a try again with other creators and other properties. He opened that door for the rest of us. He was the only one probably who could have opened that door. But once he did, we all rushed through it. But we have him to thank for it. Without him, we wouldn't have had that.
And may both Margaret and Peter rest in peace as well. And thank you very much, David, for sharing your memories on both of them. David, I have a question for you straight away. And this is a question we asked Una McCormack before. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked her. Okay. Is it Enterprise or is it the Enterprise?
Well, the house style is drop the noun marker. So if I'm writing prose, particularly in, let's say, a Strange New Worlds novel, they'll say, we better get back to Enterprise.
Yes.
They don't say, we're going back to the Enterprise. In dialogue, they would say, we need to get back to Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, this follows sort of the pattern of, modern naval parlance. That's the way they would talk about a ship today. We need to get back to Enterprise. We need to get back to Lexington. We need to get back to Potemkin. You speak of it without the noun marker, A, because it's cleaner and it's faster. But it's just, at this point, it's just tradition. So they've had it sort of beaten into us. The only time you really would put in the noun marker is if you needed it grammatically to distinguish something that would otherwise be verbally confusing. But for the most part, you drop the noun marker.
I think the point about the time was, I think is it Parallax or something like that in the first season of Voyager, and when they see a kind of an echo of the ship, and Tom Paris says it's the Voyager instead of saying it's Voyager, and I remember thinking that just sounds really fucking weird. And I'll always remember when the animated series was being shown on BBC Two when I first started watching it, jeepers, 30-something years ago. I'll always remember the continuity announcer saying, animated space adventure with Captain Kirk and the crew of Enterprise. And I was there, where's the in it? He should have said crew of the Enterprise. And I was there, isn't that just so...
Yeah, basically you would drop the if you put the Enterprise and we're using it as an adjective. Captain Kirk and the Enterprise crew.
Yes.
And even then there's a the in front of it, because the is actually for crew, but you're using Enterprise as a modifier. The crew of the Enterprise, would technically be more correct. That's an example where in a book, if I'm saying, well, we've got to tell the crew of the Enterprise something, then I would use the.
Yes.
But if I'm having somebody refer to the ship as a direct object rather than as a modifier to something like the crew, if I'm speaking of it directly, we got to get back to Enterprise. That's because there, you're using it as a direct object. If you're using it as a descriptor of something else, then you probably have to drop in the. Otherwise, it just sounds funny in English.
I'd say anybody who's watching this interview is going, show what is the obsession with the word the in front of Enterprise in this situation. David, this is your first Star Trek Strange New Worlds novel and all that kind of thing. So obviously, look, you've done other series, you've created your own characters, you've kind of had other characters, you've kind of had their voice in that. What way did you want to kind of present the characters in this book?
Well, as I always do, I want to capture what they feel like on screen for all of us. The goal is that when you open the book and you're suddenly in the adventure with these characters, it should feel like you're enjoying either an episode of the show or maybe a movie version of an episode. You should feel like these are the characters that that you are familiar with week to week. And even more specifically, this should feel like Anson Mount's Christopher Pike, not Jeffrey Hunter's Pike. This should feel like Ethan Peck's Spock, not, say, Zachary Quinto's Spock or, somebody else's Spock. This should be Ethan Peck's Spock, and so on and so forth. The relationships should reflect the dynamics that we see every week on the show, not the ones that we remember, say, from the 1960s version of the original series, not the ones that we maybe saw in the movies from J.J. Abrams, 16 years ago, but the ones that we see now in this show. The banter should feel like it was plucked from an episode of the show. The sense of humor, the sense of place, the pacing, everything about it, the tone, it should all feel like it's rooted in the show. So it's not that I'm necessarily going for something other than what the show does. My job is to capture and channel the show. I am there to find what makes the show feel like the show and then try to capture that in the book and then tell my narrative through that stylistic lens and through those characters' viewpoints.
So in the book, we've got Pike's perilous past, we've got a black hole betrayal, we have secret sabotage, a sizzling space station suspense. Can the Enterprise escape the gravitational grip of doom and the murderous maelstrom of Kathara Station? Now, the bigger question is, has Robert Petkoff been in touch to say how in the hell do you pronounce the majority of the names in this book just yet?
Actually, it wouldn't be Petkoff who makes that inquiry. That inquiry would come from the producer of the audiobooks.
Ooh, interesting.
And she always religiously contacts me, usually about a month or 2 months before release date, with a cheat sheet of all of the words and proper names, etc., that she is unsure how I want them pronounced for the story. Anything that you can just look up in the dictionary, that's fine. It's almost always the proper names, the character names, the place names, Star Trek specific things that I've pulled out of a hat that they're unfamiliar with. So the way that works is they put it together in a list where they put the words down the left side of the page. And then there's a tab with like little dots so you can follow it across. What they like to do is for the ones they think they've got figured out, they will write a phonetic pronunciation guide using capital letters to indicate syllables that are stressed, lowercase letters for unstressed syllables, and they will set them up with the accent marks and whatever. And my job is to look at that and say, does that sound right? And I'll sound it out. And I'll say, no, it's not quite right. And I'll rewrite it if I think it's not right. And I do the same thing for all the ones they didn't fill in. I will fill them in with phonetic guides of the same kind. And then what I do as an additional resource on top of this, since it's usually only like 2 or 3 pages of names, I will take my phone and I will record myself reading their list out loud so they can hear me say the words. They can hear me say the proper names that I've invented. And therefore, they've got this recording. It usually only runs about 2 or 3 minutes. And because I do it in the order that they gave it to me, they can compare my recording against their page and their phonetic guide. And if their actor or their director has any questions about pronunciation, they can say, well, here's what we got from the author. Here he is reading it himself. And they go, all right, well, there we go. That's the word.
So is my pronouncing of Kathara Station correct?
Close. It's Kathara. I mean, it's a TH. It's meant to be th, not t.
But see, I'm Irish, so we just kind of ditched the H completely. Like, so we're just kind of.
That's fine. You would, Scotty would. It doesn't really matter.
So in terms of then say like the dialogue in Stranger Worlds, obviously it's a bit more kind of less form than you'd have in your DS9 TNG version, all that kind of thing. Did you find that a challenge writing for it? And also when you were kind of doing it, was there any character that you found really easy to write for? And was there any character you found a bit tricky to write for? Well,
in terms of capturing the banter, it's just a matter of knowing that you're there to have fun with it. It's little things like it's almost like writing Abbott and Costello jokes, really, a lot of the times. There's a moment, I think, late in the book when they're talking about, Spock and number 1 have gone out in a shuttle to stop some rogue piece of machinery, and their solution to it is to just ram it with their already damaged shuttlecraft. And the person telling the Spike says, but it's fine. He says, after all that, the probe is fine? No, the shuttle is fine. It's like it's these sort of deliberate, it's like, no. It's like anywhere you can drop in a little bit of misunderstanding just for humorous purposes, I do it. And I was also asked to drop in a humorous subplot, which is where the whole thing with Pelia and Scott and the pepper eating contest comes from. but it's also just little things, little lines like it's like the dry wit of La'an. It's like she's not one to crack like big funny jokes, but she's dry. She's acerbic. There's a little bit of sarcasm. Sometimes you don't even realize she zinged you until it's like a minute later, and you're like, "Hey, wait a minute." And she even acknowledges that at one point, where the guy that she's sort of giving a hard time to, the station security director Mitgov,
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh yeah, you're funny." She goes, "I am. A lot of people don't get that about me." Which again feels just like one of those moments that they would give to Christina Chong, because she would just knock it out of the park.
So I've got a question for you, Dave. So, like, as I was reading through this, so this book takes place at a specific point in Strange New Worlds, actual universe, and things like that. We pick up certain character developments that have been kind of going on and all that kind of thing. And as I was reading through it, one of the questions that kind of kept coming to mind is like, David is developing a kind of a situation, developing relationships that are going on, all this, but in something that's not canon. So does that kind of have an element of frustration for you going, I'm creating, like, I'm giving, say, a certain space to these kind of pieces, but it's going to stay in this book. It won't travel into the show necessarily. Does that kind of frustrate you, kind of going, it's been a bit disappointing that these things I'm creating aren't going to travel through?
If that kind of thing bothered me, I would not have gotten to 32 Star Trek books, but I wouldn't still be doing this after 30 years if that was a problem for me. I knew the job was dangerous when I took it. I knew the rules. I knew what was happening. I know they're not going to ever use it. My goal, my mission is not to try and create stuff that they'll feel like they have to use it. My goal is to make sure the stuff that I use lines up with, or sets up, or some other way tracks with what they've already done. I was plotting this thing out. I had all of the final shooting scripts for season 3.
Okay.
That's how I was able to choose where and when to set the story. I'm like, okay, the best point where I've got the most ambiguous gap of time is between episode 6 and episode 7. We know the Enterprise had to have gone back to Starbase. It had to have had repairs. We don't know how long that took. We don't know how long it went on a shakedown cruise. We don't really know how long has transpired between that episode and the next one. It's not said. And because it's ambiguous, that's a great place to drop in a tie-in story, because you don't have to worry about getting too contradictory. You just got to keep your own continuity and timing equally vague. You don't want to commit to anything that can then later get overwritten. So you keep yours vague, just like they kept theirs vague, and you drop it into the sea of vague. So here's where I set the story between 6 and 7. So what I do is I take certain little bits and pieces, particularly from episode 7 and episode 8, about, so let's say, the relationship between Spock and La'an. And then talking about the fact that, why are we making it weird? Did I just make it weird? Is it getting weird? The little bit at the end of the book where Spock does something that he thinks is going to help the situation and improve their overall dynamic is actually based on a line from La'an at the end of episode 8, 4.5 Vulcans, where she's talking with Una and telling her about what she thinks has most recently made things the most weird. And it turns out it's the thing that Spock thought was going to help make everything better. So I take that joke, that bit, that revelation from the end of episode 8, and I turn it into the joke at the end of my book. I take the relationship dynamic that they're trying to figure out in 7, and I make it part of this story where they're tinkering with it, but they haven't figured it out in my book, which takes place between 6 and 7. So they're on the verge of trying to figure out this dynamic, but they haven't got it, and it's causing weirdness and awkwardness between them and between Spock and Chapel, because Chapel feels like we used to be such good friends, and now it feels a little awkward between us. And does he still blame me? Is he harboring some resentment? I don't understand. And the idea is that you've got all this subtext going on, and my job is just to play with that subtext, to play with those setups, to take little bits of information from, say, episode 7, where they had longer versions written out of the interviews, those talking close up, super close, and headshots. that they did with everybody for their interviews.
We'll have
They
to
had a
do
lot
this.
more of that.
We'll have to do a disclaimer on the video, David. When you put your head forward, I'll get Mike to blur the screen with a big blue dot, and that's.
So they had a lot more of that written out than was actually used in the episode. Like they shot lots of stuff and then they picked in editing what it was they wanted to keep. But for instance, the narrative from Christopher Pike's youth that ties into the central narrative of Ring of Fire comes from one of his interview bits, which is in the episode, which is in episode 7, the bit where he's talking about the horse.
Yeah.
He glosses over it pretty quickly in the final edit of episode 7. But in the script, he went into more detail. And then in the book, we go into even more. We dive even deeper into what a personal tragedy that moment was for him. And how it has, come back, that episode, that moment has echoed, that mistake has echoed itself in other ways throughout his life, throughout his career, to the point where these mistakes haunt him. The loss of innocent lives because of his mistakes haunts him. And so part of what this story is about is him getting a chance to atone for the mistakes of the past and set things right. And in the case of the horse, where even if he can't make that right, he can learn to forgive himself, which is what the epigraph of the book is all about. The book's epigraph is essentially about our need to learn how to forgive ourselves.
Actually, that was the question I was going to ask you specifically on Pike, in terms of, say, he made the mistake, it stayed with him for so long, and then we kind of come across the situation again, and it's kind of, it resolves itself in a good way. But my question was, we have a situation where, like, the ship is duplicated at the end with the time rift and all that kind of thing. And then we have, so Pike's incident still did happen.
It did, and yet, if he hadn't intervened here and now and done what he did, his mistake would have been compounded again.
Correct. And then the question I had in my head then was, but it doesn't, so even though he's kind of the Enterprise, sorry, I won't say the Enterprise has succeeded in this situation, so does it kind of take away anything from Pike then in terms of like what happened to him when he was kind of younger then as a result of the guilt he's carried through him? Has he kind of like resolved that guilt fully then? I suppose that's the question for everyone to kind of interpret themselves.
I don't know that he would, and it's not so much that it's resolved fully to the point where it's gone and he can just forget about it. Yes. The point is that he has in some way atoned for it. The actions that he's taken have helped at least mitigate the harm from what he did, and it brought something good out of the tragedy. It's brought something out of it that would have simply added to the tragedy had he not done what he did. So he can't undo the past, but because of the things he does now, what he's learned is that you can't change the past.
Yep.
But the things you do now, essentially, you contribute to the overall quotient of good in the universe or the overall quotient of pain in the universe with the actions you take at any given moment. The only thing you can hope is that in the aggregate over the course of your life, your contributions to the overall sum of sentient good outweigh those of sentient suffering when you're done. And he feels like here, at least he has done something to offset the quotient of suffering he caused. And in the case of the even earlier incident that he can't fix, he's learned that he can at least forgive himself and let go of the pain.
One thing as well, and this is something we asked Una McCormick when she was on talking to us about Asylum as well. What is the fascination overall in Strange New Worlds and in Asylum and here with food in Strange New Worlds?
Because they've made such a big deal of it on the show.
Yes.
With Anson Mount, one of the ways the writers chose to define the Pike character is that he's essentially an amateur chef. He has his quarters redesigned with this very high-end cooking suite layout, which is not normal and is in no way standard, not even in captain's quarters. But here he's got a big refrigerator. He's got himself a flat top. He's got a flame grill. He's probably got deep fryers hidden somewhere underneath. He's got specialized replicators. He's got a wok. He's got all kinds of crazy stuff. He's got a blender and a food processor. And He's got pots and pans and crap, which I'm sure is great when the ship is under fire and that stuff starts flying around the room. But, never mind all that.
Reading
But they made a point out of the fact that he has like the whole crew into his quarters for regular dinners. He treats his senior staff like his family. He gives them a feeling of family and community aboard his ship. And by cooking for them, this is an act known as the, I'm trying to remember how it's referred to. Service in command. The idea is that the person who is the commanding officer puts themselves in a role where they are serving those under them by cooking for them, providing them with a meal. Servant leadership is the term I'm looking for. Servant leadership. And it's actually a principle that's taught at military academies. It's taught at Annapolis. It's taught at West Point. That this is an important way of showing your subordinates respect, showing them that you care about their welfare. It builds camaraderie. It serves as a bonding process for the overall group and also between members of the group and the commanding officer. And so the writers chose to have this be the focal point of Pike's servant leadership style. And because they've made such a big deal out of him cooking, and he likes to cook for people, and he likes to host these big dinners, and yada, 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 it is an integral part of his character. One of the first things we see about him in the pilot is him cooking at home and talking about him cooking for Battelle. Cooking is his love language. And because it's so critical to Pike, and because Pike is your anchor character, it makes sense that food comes through as being an important component in stories that are derived from the source material. It also does not hurt that I used to be an assistant chef when I was younger. I worked in restaurants for about 6 years. I've made just about everything you can think of. I was a steak chef, a pizza guy. I made Chicago-style pizza, New York-style pizza. I was a burger flipper. I was a sous chef at a restaurant called Bistro on Main in Northampton, Massachusetts, way back when. Kind of place that made its own bread, made its own aioli from scratch. To this day, I still watch Top Chef. I cook pretty much. I'm the cook in the house. I cook most of the dinners. I like to fool around with what's called mise en place, which is fancy fine dining style plating of food. I've got a chef jacket. I have my beautiful chef knife, which is made out of Damascus steel. So it doesn't hurt that I'm a bit of a food nut myself.
So what you're saying is, David, the book that you're hopefully writing next is going to be the Starfleet cookbook as written by David Mack in that situation then as well.
Actually, I pitched it and they didn't buy it.
Damn it.
And the thing is, I pitched it as a cookbook, not a recipe book. The idea was I was going to pitch it as it was called Cooking with the Captain, and the idea was that it was supposed to be written by Christopher Pike as channeled through me. And the premise was that it wasn't a book of recipes like they've always done before. It would have been a book about how to cook, how to work in a kitchen without, let's say, killing yourself, how to properly use chef knives without cutting your fingers off. What are the different chef knives used for? How do you use them? What is the difference between, let's say, this type of, this type of cutting, this type of cutting? What's the difference between chop, mince, dice? What do these terms mean? Like, you can get the best recipe in the world, but if you don't understand the terminology, if it says pan sear this, what is the difference between pan sear and pan fry? What's the difference between searing and broiling? If you don't understand the terms, you can't follow the recipe. So this whole idea that I had, which I pitched, was a book about how to cook. And then corollary to that was the things you learn from learning how to function as both a solo chef and as a member of a team in a kitchen apply directly to lessons of command for how to run a starship, and also apply to how to run your life. And so the things you learn about clean as you go is about learning to stay organized, learning to control your environment, learning to be responsible for your own actions and your own mistakes, and so on and so forth. And so I would have broken it down into sections: how to equip your kitchen, how to equip yourself as a chef, basic techniques, this, that, the other. I had it all laid out. I had the whole thing planned. My agent shopped it around to multiple publishers, including Simon & Schuster. No takers. To this day, Anson Mount says he wants to do one of these cookbooks. We could have gotten him. He would have done photo shoots. He'd have worn the apron. I probably could have gotten him to go out in persona as Captain Pike to talk shows, and he would have hawked the damn book. It would have been great. Do they do it? No. They threw away millions. I'm telling you, millions. They've thrown away millions by turning this down. I don't understand.
It was printing money. The book was going to print.
It was a license to print money. I don't understand.
Actually, I could definitely use it with the part about how not to cut your finger off, because I cut my thumb in making something yesterday. I have to ask you something.
How you hold the knife.
I have to ask you a question, because this popped into my head the second I read it. We have a part in the book where Spock used a holographic ploy to trick somebody, and I immediately started thinking about Mission Impossible Rogue. No, it wasn't. It was 4, wasn't it? In Russia. It's the corridor scene, and I was there. Did he use that in inspiration? Fucking, that was right. It's fucking right. I knew it.
Yep, I'm pretty sure that one is. It's not Rogue Nation. It's the one before Rogue Nation.
Is it? Oh wait.
Is it?
Oh Lord, what's it called?
Because Rogue Nation is 5, Fallout is 6.
No, Fallout 7, isn't it?
No, 7 is Dead Reckoning.
Oh yeah.
And 8 is Final Reckoning.
Oh, there's one.
So Fallout is 6. Rogue Nation is 5. What was 4?
I'm actually googling it here. Mission Impossible 2, 3. Ghost Protocol.
Ghost Protocol. Yeah, it was Ghost Protocol. That's one where they start by blowing up the Kremlin.
Yes,
yeah.
That's exactly it. So I was
right.
Yes.
The whole point was to do the Mission Impossible game. That was the whole idea.
Question then as well, right? In a situation like this, we have the stories, obviously, we've got so many things going on in the story and things like that, and there's such a part of it tied to Pike's past. Why leave him on the ship then and not put him on the station? Is it to kind of remove him and make it a bit more frustrating for him that he can't do much about it? It's kind of sit there and wait, or what did you kind of feel about it?
A part of it is that Pike, unlike Kirk, doesn't tend to go on the landing parties. Pike tends to stay on the ship and send Una in command of the landing party. That's just his style of command. He doesn't tend to be the guy on the ground very often. But what was important about this here is he needs to be the guy on the ship for 2 reasons. One, you can't send both your XO and your captain into a situation like this. It's too risky. You got to leave at least one of your senior people on the ship. 2, because of the nature of his story and the things that we need to replay and the crisis that I need him to find himself in and the decision that I need him to be able to make, that decision can only happen if he is on the bridge of the Enterprise. He has to be on the bridge. Mm-hmm. If he's not the one on the ship, then who's making the call about the tractor beam? Who's making the call about whether to cut loose or not? The whole point is that decision about whether to cut the tractor beam, whether to hold or let go, stand your ground or surrender. That is the whole crux of his entire story arc, going back to both of the earlier incidents, the one with Chattelet and the one with the horse. Mm-hmm. In order for that parallel to play out, again, in trilateral symmetry, he has to be on the bridge of the ship. It doesn't work if he's on the station. And the folks on the station have their own stories to work out. The story with Una is one about learning to see somebody else who is in a position of needing that trust about a secret that she needed. Mm-hmm. With Spock and Chapel and La'an, it's about them working out the weirdness of their own new dynamic. With La'an, it's also partly about learning to exert authority without being a complete jerk about it, even though the guy she's dealing with totally deserves it. Mm-hmm. And essentially, so everybody's kind of got their own arc, and even Spock, to a little bit, is learning the sort of nuances of how to be a leader. And you see it in like a little moment near the end of the book. He's dealing with a couple of civilian technicians aboard the station. He's asked them to find some bit of technology or whip something up. They said, well, this is the thing we whipped up, but this is the best we can do. It doesn't send anything complicated,
That's
but
right.
boy, is it loud. And he's like, gentlemen, I think you've just saved our lives. I'll be commending you both. And it's like he's learned, to see the benefit in even a small contribution, but he's also learned the benefit to morale in making sure these two guys know, no, you didn't just do something worthless. In fact, you may have just saved all of our lives. And you are valuable and you're worthwhile, and I'm going to make sure you are recognized for your efforts. This is a property of a good leader, is making certain that the people under you know when they've done well, not just when they've screwed up.
Like it's interesting going through the book. Like you've given every character like a space to do something in the book. It's that like it's incredible in such a short kind of period of time. We can kind of do so much. Even with Ortega as being mentored as being kind of the number one with Pike and things like that. Then as well with Una then as well. Like Una's got some really strong moments in the story and all that kind of thing. What made her the right character to be the center of this mystery instead of leaning more on Pike or Spock or something like that? Because obviously, as you said, we come to a situation whereby you've got someone who's got a really kind of big secret that they don't have anybody to confide in. Sven is now dead. And what can she do? And then you have Una then kind of being that person for her. And it kind of, we have to develop the relationship in terms of a mystery going on. Is there trust? What's really happening and things like that? How did you approach that with Una?
Well, as I think you just spelled it out, I mean, that was essentially the logical progression of events. Is once I decided that Una was going to be commanding the mission, that Spock was going to be along as her second, then it's got to be up to Una. Una is your chief detective on the ground. She's the one who is representing Starfleet's interests aboard the station. And so she's the one who has to dig into the mystery, which means she is the one who is going to be best positioned to uncover the secrets of the station's director, Valkaya. So Valkaya is going to be put in this position of, she knows she's going to be found out. She has to reveal something. Does she reveal everything? Does she reveal the truth? Can she trust Una? And it's only because we know, as the audience, because we've seen what Una has been through as an Illyrian, having been, court-martialed, having nearly lost not only her commission, but also her freedom. We know that she knows how to keep a secret. She understands the difference between a self-serving secret, a harmful secret, and one which is kept for the good, for the greater good. She understands the difference, and she's going to recognize it here. So part of what made Una the right character for that part of the story is that she is someone, her background parallels, at least thematically, that of Valkaya. They have something in common in the nature of the kind of secret they both keep, which is going to make her the perfect character to sympathize with Valkaya and eventually go from being her adversary or her foil to being her ally and her friend.
And in terms of, say, La'an as well, like there's a lot of emotionality in this book. We kind of mentioned about, how she's utterly hilarious, but nobody kind of picks up on it and things like that. How did you approach her journey here compared to how we've seen her grow in the show?
What was interesting about La'an, specifically with regard to her situation with Spock and with Chapel, I was guided specifically by Kirsten Beyer, who was acting as the tie-in approvals person for Secret Hideout, to make sure that this did not devolve into a high school level jealousy romantic triangle. She said, these are not adolescents. These are not children. These aren't even academy cadets. These are grown adults in a more evolved, slightly more mature culture than the one we live in. She said, try to keep that in mind when you write these characters, that, they're not going to be sniping at each other. There isn't going to be the level of petty jealousy. There may be some friction. There's going to be some subtext, but it's not going to be an outright conflict. There isn't going to be an outright professional problem. I mean, this was covered in one of the early episodes of season 3 when Chapel has to ask La'an something about Spock, and La'an is like, oh, no, you're not one of those. And Chapel's like, no, it's not that. Relax. So they're not like that. But she can tell that there's some weird dynamic going on. Yeah. And she's wondering on some level, if Spock isn't that emotional if I'm in danger, but he's emotional if Chapel's in danger, does that mean he cares more about her than about me? And Chapel, her subtext is along the lines of, he used to be my friend. We could talk about anything, but now it's weird. Are we still close? Does Spock still care about me as a friend, as a person? And what about La'an? I mean, supposedly, we're all good, but is there any resentment? It's not an outright conflict. This is the subtext that's going on beneath the surface. And the moment where this sort of plays out with the three of them is when the saboteur tries to kill them.
Yes.
By depressurizing the corridor. They're all being sucked along by this gust of hurricane force wind. Spock basically grabs a pipe. He's got one hand hanging onto a metallic pipe that's rooted in the overhead and the deck. And with another hand, he's hanging on to La'an. And then, or I think he's hanging on to Chapel. And then Chapel is the one who catches La'an as La'an is flying by. So La'an has to trust Chapel, and Chapel has to trust Spock. If any one of these people, if either Chapel or Spock lets go, if Spock lets go, they all die. If Chapel lets go, La'an dies. And at the end of it, they managed to make it out of this by teamwork. They got two people hanging on, but that means La'an can sort of reach for and get to Christine's communicator and whatever, and yada, yada, yada. But the whole point, you get to the end of the scene, you realize Spock was hanging on so tightly that he crushed a handprint into a steel pipe. And that gives you an idea of how strong this guy is. Mm-hmm. So later on, during the bit where he's doing the Mission Impossible 4 gag with the hollow screen, and then he gets his hands on the Klingon spy, and starts beating the living daylights out of this guy until he's told to stop, and he's showing no emotion while he's doing it. That's a terrifying moment, because now you have to wonder, is it just that he logically figured out this is a Klingon and requires an additional level of beating to stay suppressed?
Yep.
Or was he just not showing emotion, but was he in fact letting loose because this Klingon made the mistake of saying out loud, "I'm going to kill Christine first"? Is that what got the guy the beating? Was it logically taking down a strong opponent, or was it, "You motherfucker, I'm going to break your fucking skull"?
David, I don't know if I told you, but this is a family-friendly show. We can't be cursing.
You lied to me.
What the fuck? Just who do you think you are coming to my show like this, cursing and all that kind of thing? As you said as well, it is one of those situations that you could easily, a story like this could descend into just High School Musical of people ignoring each other and things like that. And one of the things that I loved about the book as it's kind of going through it is you would have these situations between Spock, Chapel, and La'an. And then you mightn't have it. You mightn't have it for 50 pages. You mightn't even notice it's happening, and then suddenly you'll come by and you're there going, "Oh, geez, yeah, I forgot about that." But they're professional people, and they're adults, and they have a mission to do, and they have a job to get done.
In the moment, right after Spock beats the daylights out of the Klingon, it's actually La'an and Chapel who have a moment together where she's like, "Have you ever seen Spock react like that before?" And she's like, "No, I've never seen that. Have you?" "No, I've never seen that either." And they're both like, "What the hell just happened?" They're both on the same page.
Yeah.
What the hell? But there's also a nice little moment where at the end, when when Chapel is sort of alone and they don't know if they're going into the black hole, whether they're going to be saved or not, or whether this is the end. And, Chapel is very reasonably thinking, I wish I had Roger here. I wish, I could be with Roger right now. Yeah. And then she sees that very sort of discreetly, Spock and La'an have taken each other's hands underneath the console. They're discreet, they're professionals. They're not going to make a big show of it. But in that moment, she's like, thank God he has somebody. Thank God they have each other right now. She cares about her friends enough to be happy that they have each other and not be jealous about it.
Every time in the book it said Roger, all I keep on thinking, because I know it's Roger Corby, but I keep on thinking of Roger Corman. I
heard the same thing. I'm like, why is she dating the film? No,
David, as you went through this, and we had a discussion with this when we were talking about Firewall and things like that, like when you were kind of going through this, how did you set the mood in your head? Did you have a specific playlist that you kind of went through? Is there any kind of bits in this in the story that you kind of set the music in your own head? Is there anything else you completely blatantly ripped off from Mission Impossible 4? You know, all of these questions.
Well, obviously, I was listening to the soundtrack from Star Trek: The Original Series.
Mhm.
Because even though they don't use that music in Strange New Worlds, it's the same era, and at least
Yeah.
it puts me in the right Star Trek historical time period. I'm at least thinking in TOS terms. I'm seeing that. In terms of some pieces of music that were instrumental, I'm still putting together my Spotify playlist with which to promote the
Lovely,
book.
lovely, excellent.
But I'll give you a hint as to some of the first few tracks. Guess what? They're from a Mission Impossible soundtrack by Lauren Bell. The soundtrack for Mission Impossible 7, Dead Reckoning, the first 3 or 4 tracks of the soundtrack, which in the movie relate to the Russian submarine dealing with the entity and the entity screwing up their systems and tricking them into shooting themselves with their own torpedo.
Yep.
Here, I'm listening to that music out of that context. I wipe away all previous associations. That soundtrack of that sort of opening sequence is what inspired the sequence with Pike on the Chattelet in the flashback sequence.
Ah, very good.
So that whole sort of opening action music, which is going to be part of the Spotify playlist, is basically what inspired that. And then there are 2 other tracks from later in the soundtrack. One is called Murder and the Orient Express, and the other is simply called Countdown. Murder and the Orient Express specifically is what inspired for me the visual of Enterprise with its tractor beams desperately and futilely trying to hold on to this massive space station that's being sucked into the accretion disk and pulled toward a black hole, to the point where it gets pulled down into the fire of the accretion disk. Enterprise is basically being dragged. It's like a hummingbird trying to, stop a yacht from being pulled into a whirlpool. And so that image of, Enterprise desperately hanging on with tractor beams and being dragged violently into a sea of burning stellar plasma was inspired by those 2 tracks of music. The second of which is what inspired the resolution and helped me figure out how Pike gets them out of that mess.
I have to ask, David, in terms of, say, we don't, well, by we, I mean you, did not reveal where the ship originally came from. Was that a decision from the very start that you weren't going to reveal the actual time it came from?
Yes.
Okay.
I always knew that they were going to be coy about it. They weren't going to say whether they came from our future or our past. Essentially, they have a temporal prime directive. They can't tell us anything. They don't want us to know anything, and they don't want us to know if we're telling them something they shouldn't know.
But do you?
So,
but do you know?
I have a vague sense of where they're probably from, but I wanted to keep it vague within the story for a couple of reasons. One, just because it felt right.
Yeah.
It's what it felt like the producers of the show would do in a similar circumstance, but also because it hedges my bet. If anything regarding time travel, time shifts, anything like this ever comes up in, say, season 4 or season 5 of Strange New Worlds, or if somebody has already done something like this in the books and somebody says, this contradicts this or this contradicts that, by not actually spelling it out, by leaving myself a bit of ambiguity around the edges of it, I can just sort of hand wave it away.
Fine.
I can jazz hands.
Fine. It's all fine. David, what is next for you then? In terms of, say, we've got our fabulous Ring of Fire book out and things like that. When do you hope for your next Star Trek book to be out?
Probably around this time next year.
Ooh, lovely stuff. Excellent stuff. Can you tell us anything about it at the moment?
Only that I have a signed contract.
This sounds like something from Mission Impossible, like interviewing KGB operative who's refusing to actually give you a direct answer.
Basically, I can say that I have a signed contract because I have a signed contract, and the NDA doesn't say that I can't say I have a signed contract. But anything more than that, I can't say because I have to wait until other parties involved decide when to say what, and I don't get to make that call.
My very last point in the book, David, is you said about the accretion disc, and I'm not going to lie to you, I kept reading that as accreditation disc because in my job I use the term accreditation all the time, and I knew I was misreading
It's not
it.
my fault. It's not my fault if you can't read.
Robert Petkoff and myself are going to have a serious conversation about this and have to lodge a formal complaint with Simon & Schuster.
Please tell me he didn't say accreditation.
We'll find out.
Please tell me he got it right.
We'll find out when the audiobook is
released. Good Lord. Heavens to Murgatroyd, I can't take this kind of pressure. I can't work like this.
David, it has been an absolute pleasure yet again to have you back on after Firewall, after Ring of Fire. We look forward to again having you back with us next year to discuss your book again. If you haven't picked it up, guys, A Ring of Fire is available right now in all good bookstores, wherever you get your books, and also the audiobook with Robert Petkoff pronouncing all the words correctly that I'm completely failing to do so, and this is very important, is also going to be available soon if it's not already. But with that, David, I'm going to leave the last word to you. What's your last word in Ring of Fire?
Well, not so much about Ring of Fire, but depending on when you're listening to this, through November 3rd of 2025, every Monday, look for new episodes of Star Trek Khan, the full cast audio drama, which details basically what happened to Khan and his people on SETI Alpha 5 that basically led to him becoming such a revenge-focused madman. 5 episodes so far have been released. 4 are yet to come. The series was based on an original story by Nick Meyer with some additional development by Mac Rogers. The 9 episodes are co-written by myself and Kirsten Beyer, and they are produced by Secret Hideout, CBS, and they're coming out now. It stars Naveen Andrews and Ren Schmidt. People have been saying lots of good things about it, and I'm glad that people are enjoying the heck out of it. I'm hoping that if enough people continue to check it out and continue to enjoy it and share it far and wide, that there will be more such audio drama productions, because I would love to write some more of these, I gotta tell you.
And I would absolutely second that. I'm a huge fan of audio dramas. I've been listening to the Khan episodes. They've been absolutely fantastic. Star Trek needs more of this. So if you are debating it, please, for the love of God, listen to it. It's fantastic. We do want more audio dramas. So please do listen to it. But with that, David, we hope we'll have you and Kirsten back at some point, specifically talk Khan, actually.
I would love that.
But with that, David, thank you so much. As always, we're delighted when you have time to pop into us here at the Clonestar Podcast. I have been your host, Joe Hurley, and we will see you on the next episode of the Clonestar Podcast. Until then, live long and prosper.